Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about something that isn't listed in any official Imperial archives, that no cartographica or fleet admiral will ever openly acknowledge. And yet those who know. There are ships above Sol, silent fleets. They drift just beyond the reach of routine patrol routes, hiding in radiation shadows, eclipsing moons for days at a time, vanishing before any contact can be made. They don't broadcast signals. They don't request docking permissions. They don't do anything, really. They just watch. And what chills the bones of even the most hardened voidfarers is that these fleets have been seen for millennia, and no one seems able to stop them, or even name them. It's one of those whispered legends that circulates through the underdecks of long-haul freighters and the private vox channels of the Navis Nobilit. You won't hear about them in the Schola Pergenium. You won't see them on star charts, but they're always there, just outside the glow of Terra, watching, waiting. And the question that haunts everyone who's ever seen their flicker on Auspex or caught their silhouette in a solar flare is simple and terrifying. Who are they? And maybe even more frightening, what do they want? The earliest mentions of the silent fleets are almost impossible to date precisely. And maybe that's what makes them feel so unsettling. They exist in the margins of history, of star charts, of official doctrine. You'll find fragments, whispers, ghost data buried in the long-discarded transit logs of the Great Crusade era. Back then, the Imperium was young and hungry, expanding like wildfire across the stars. And yet even then, some fleets noted anomalies near Sol, faint Auspex returns, reflections that didn't belong to any known celestial body, entire patrols sent to investigate that simply never returned. One of the oldest recurring stories comes from the logs of the Praetor of Dawn, a Crusade-era battle barge that operated near Saturn's rings. The vessel's final transmission included an encrypted segment, later decoded by Mechanicus archivists centuries later, that mentioned mirrored vessels coasting among the moons, bearing no heraldry and replying to no hails. Then the signal cut. The ship was never recovered. Some say it fell into a warp rift. Others say it was erased by order of the Ordo Malleus. But those few lines remain etched into data looms as one of the earliest recorded references to unidentified vessels within Sol itself. There's also the curious case of navigator Tarson Lyrian, a member of House Belisarius, who in his personal journals described an armada cloaked in light, without direction, orbiting Sol's dark side like a silent hymn. These journals were recovered after his mysterious disappearance in the early years of M30, and the Navis Nobilite reportedly declared them apocryphal and heretical. But that only made them more infamous. Fan communities have dissected his words endlessly. Some believe he glimpsed a vision from the warp. Others say it was an encounter with entities beyond time, remnants of forgotten history that refused to fully vanish. Another fan-favorite account is tied to the Black Ships, those feared and revered transports of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. A particularly old vessel, the Vigilant Mercy, had a route through the outer edges of Sol, well beyond Pluto's orbit. A single astropathic distress pulse was sent out, fragmented, barely readable, but unmistakably desperate. It mentioned being shadowed by 13 vessels of unknown pattern, drifting contrary to orbital mechanics, casting no reflection. That's all. When recovery vessels arrived, the area was empty. The ship itself was eventually found derelict, with all souls aboard dead from internal hemorrhaging, no external damage. The incident was buried under the label of psychic implosion due to warp leakage, but many of us who've studied the fringe reports know this story by heart. It's one of those accounts that gives you chills, even when you've read it a dozen times. What's really bizarre is that these sightings don't form a neat pattern. They're not consistent, not seasonal, not aligned with any known enemy incursions. They're scattered across thousands of years like breadcrumbs left by something ancient and cold, something not concerned with being seen, but not afraid of it either. And while none of the early sightings were ever confirmed or officially followed up, they were enough to spark a slow, creeping paranoia in certain circles. Some rogue traders, especially those who've worked in the solar region for generations, have kept private ledgers, passed from captain to captain, noting the times when the void stares back. Some of them even avoid specific corridors of space altogether, claiming the Vultures are hungry again. To me, and to a lot of fans who dig into this niche lore, these early signs feel like a warning that was never heard. Like Sol itself has been under quiet surveillance since the very beginning. Maybe it's not a coincidence that Terra became the throne world, the center of the Imperium. Maybe it was chosen because they had already claimed it as a vantage point. It's terrifying, in a way, to imagine the Emperor ascending to godhood on a planet watched by things that never blink. But it also makes you wonder, what were they waiting for? Or worse, what are they still waiting for? There's something deeply off about how little is said regarding the silent fleets. Not just in the usual, Imperium doesn't like to talk about weird stuff way. This feels surgical, forced. It's not that there are no records. It's that wherever there should be records, there's just absence. A perfect sterile silence, where messy human paranoia should have left some kind of smear. And for a lot of us who follow the breadcrumbs, that's the most damning evidence of all. You start to notice it once you've read enough old Void lore. Archived logs from rogue trader expeditions, old chartist routes, scribbled accounts from retired Navy officers, you begin to see patterns. More specifically, you see holes in the patterns. Certain sectors around Sol that should have daily patrol routes but are only logged once every few decades. Coordinates that used to appear on standard navigation maps, deleted, redacted, or simply renamed. In some ancient star charts, there are rings around Terra labeled as non-essential survey regions. But why would that exist in the heart of the Imperium's most guarded space? I once came across a declassified set of scans, probably leaked by someone inside the Adeptus Administratum. They were star maps from over 500 years ago, showing drifting signatures near the moons of Jupiter. Dozens of overlapping orbital paths with no designation, no ident tags, and strangely, no follow-up notations. 2 years later, those same maps were reissued. Those paths had vanished, erased, not altered, not renamed, completely gone. It's like someone wanted to pretend those readings never existed. And honestly, that's way more terrifying than any threat that gets acknowledged in an Imperial bulletin. Fans have long speculated that the Inquisition, particularly the Ordo Hereticus and Ordo Xenos, play a massive role in scrubbing this data. Think about it. If these fleets don't behave like known Xenos, but also clearly don't align with Imperial design, they represent an ontological threat, something that doesn't fit in the categories the Inquisition is built to manage. The surest way to neutralize that threat without admitting weakness is to pretend it doesn't exist. And if that means purging an entire command deck's worth of void logs or rewriting an entire month's worth of a navigator's sensory reports, well, that's just standard procedure in the darker halls of Terra. Then there's the Mechanicus. The cult of Mars has always had its own ideas about secrecy. If anyone's got long-range gravimetric sensors tuned to the edges of Sol, it's them. But you'd be lucky to pry even a whisper from a data priest about unknown signal signatures. Some fan theories even go as far as to suggest that there are specific Forge worlds tasked with tracking these fleets, but only for internal Mechanicus purposes, like it's a private experiment or maybe a forbidden pilgrimage. After all, the Mechanicus sees the universe through a different lens. To them, knowledge isn't just power, it's sacrosanct. And if these fleets hold knowledge from before the dark age of technology, or worse, knowledge that contradicts the Omnissiah's doctrine, well, burying it becomes holy work. One of the more fringe but fascinating ideas is that entire Astartes' void patrols have been reassigned mid-mission after witnessing the fleets. Not because they were attacked, just because they saw. I read a story once, passed around in some of the deeper fan circles, about a squadron from the Imperial Fists stationed aboard a monitoring post orbiting Saturn. They picked up impossible shadows moving against the light of the sun, moving against it like the laws of gravity didn't apply. Their vox logs were clean, disciplined, but you could hear something strange in the tone. One of the sergeants used the phrase, "the Emperor's blind spot." Days later, the station went dark. Not destroyed, just removed. That's the word the report used. Removed. What does that even mean? And of course there's the astropaths. Sensitive to things no sensor can pick up, they're usually the first to scream when something truly unnatural gets too close. But good luck finding a single surviving astropathic relay transmission that even mentions the silent fleets. Every time you get close to one, boom, it's been flagged as heretical, or the choir involved has conveniently died in a spontaneous feedback burn. Some fan archivists have even started collecting these dead transmissions like puzzle pieces. The idea is that maybe, just maybe, if you string them together, you'll get a picture. But most of us think that if you really saw what they saw, you'd wish you hadn't. The most haunting thing for me is that if this is all true, then Terra isn't the heart of the Imperium because it's safe. It's the opposite. It's the throne because it's watched. Every decision, every war, every failure and triumph, it's all been played out under the silent gaze of fleets that have never once made themselves known. That's not just secrecy. That's dominion, a kind of control that doesn't require words or weapons, just presence and silence. One of the most compelling and frankly disturbing theories that's made the rounds in the fan community is that these silent fleets aren't alien. They're not Necrons or ancient AI ghosts or some remnant of the Dark Age. They're human, or at least they started that way. The idea is that they belong to someone powerful enough to keep them hidden and terrifying enough that even the High Lords of Terra would rather look the other way than ask questions. A lot of this speculation begins with the Navis Nobilite. If you've ever dug into the old Navigator House archives, you'll notice that some of the ancient dynasties, like House Belisarius, House Nostromo, even House Lyras, possess vast private fleets, many of which are never listed in any official records. That's not exactly uncommon. Navigator houses have always had a kind of untouchable autonomy when it comes to their void operations, but there are persistent rumors that some of these fleets never leave the Sol system, that they orbit in forgotten patterns, answer to no command but their own, and have been active since the Unification Wars. The theory goes that these fleets are ancient safeguards or watchers put in place by the navigators themselves to protect their bloodlines and investments should Terra ever fall. Others think they're even older, pre-Imperial relics left over from when the Navigator genome was first engineered. Whatever the case, there are whispers that the silent fleets in the Navis Nobilite are tied by oath and gene memory, locked in a pact that even the Emperor may have known about and tolerated because he needed them. Then you've got the rogue traders. If anyone in the Imperium has the resources, the authority, and the arrogance to build an armada outside of scrutiny, it's them. Rogue trader dynasties operate on the edges of legality as a rule. Some of them have entire forge worlds under their patronage, not to mention private astropaths, genitor cults, and even captured Xenos tech. I once read a fringe essay by a Mechanicus initiate suggesting that the silent fleets are ghost armadas belonging to ancient warrant holders whose missions were never rescinded. Their descendants might not even know they still exist, or worse, they do, and use them for purposes we can't begin to understand. The Ordo Xenos also enters the conversation here, and not in a flattering way. Some fans speculate that the silent fleets might be part of a long-term Ordo Xenos containment strategy. Think about it. What better way to monitor potential galactic threats than from the very core of the Imperium, right under everyone's noses? If these fleets are equipped with alien tech, or if their purpose is to shadow and study possible Xenos infiltration routes, it would explain their silence. It would also explain the layers of secrecy around them. The Ordo Xenos is notorious for destroying data even they deem too dangerous to keep. What if the silence isn't just about fear? It's about containment. There's also a much darker, more conspiratorial angle that's gained traction lately. The idea that the fleets don't just serve one faction, they're a failsafe created by a coalition of the Imperium's elite. A private doomsday mechanism. Say Terra ever faces a true existential threat, not just another Black Crusade or Hive fleet, but something final. These fleets would activate. They wouldn't defend Terra. They'd erase it. Wipe it clean so that whatever's coming can't take root. A lot of this theory ties into reports of unknown weapon signatures picked up by deep space augurs, bursts of energy that don't correspond to any known Imperial or Xenos technology. If true, that kind of power is terrifying, but also weirdly believable. This is Warhammer. Nothing is ever just what it seems. One of my favorite fan theories, though, is more personal. It suggests that the silent fleets are tied to a forgotten Primarch, or perhaps even one of the Lost Legions. that they were loyal, but too dangerous, too strange to be allowed into the regular structure of the Great Crusade. So instead, they were left behind. A shadow legion, watching, waiting, hidden in plain sight above the very planet that cast them aside. It's poetic in a bleak 40k way. If there's any universe where a betrayed demigod might leave behind a fleet to guard his memory, it's this one. In the end, no one really knows. That's the part that keeps pulling us back in. These theories are more than just idle speculation. They're a way of coping with the unknown. Because the idea that there are ships above Sol, untouched, unnamed, and unseen by the general populace, it means there's a game being played that we don't even know exists. And the players? They're not just powerful. They're ancient. And they've been planning their next move for far longer than we've been asking questions. The descriptions of the silent fleet's ships are where things start to feel truly surreal. They don't match anything we know. Not Imperial, not Xenos, not even Dark Age of Technology classifications. Every time someone claims to have visual data or a half-corrupted pict capture, the image is either distorted beyond recognition or just wrong. Ships with curves that don't follow the logic of mass and thrust, structures that look more like cathedrals grown from bone and light than anything built by tools. Some say they don't cast shadows. Others say they don't reflect light at all. And a few, usually the ones who've gone a little too deep, say they shine with a color that doesn't exist. I remember coming across a report, third-hand of course, because no official copy ever survived, that detailed a deep-range auger sweep by a Mechanicus survey vessel near the edge of Neptune's gravity well. The tech priest responsible flagged several contacts as non-conforming constructs. That's a cold, technical phrase, but when you read the interpretation logs, it gets wild. He described one of the vessels as having a geometry that collapsed when measured, like it literally defied dimensional analysis. The data eventually destabilized the logic engine handling the report. It self-corrupted and deleted itself before anyone else could analyze it. The most debated aspect among fans is whether these ships are from the past or the future. Or maybe neither. Some believe they're relics of the Dark Age of Technology, possibly crafted by human hands long before the Imperium's rise, before the fall of the Men of Iron. That would explain the impossible designs. The tech adepts love to say that true archaeotech is indistinguishable from magic, and these ships feel like magic. Ships that move without leaving a warp wake. Hulls that regenerate. Power signatures that pulse in musical frequencies instead of mathematical ones. It's like they weren't designed to conquer, but to outlast reality itself. Others argue they're not human at all, or at least, not anymore. Maybe they started that way. Maybe they were part of an ancient Terran defense initiative, one of those forgotten last light projects meant to survive the end of all things. Over millennia, perhaps they evolved, shifted. Not biologically, but in form and purpose. Machines becoming myth. You see the same kind of speculative awe in the way people talk about Necron tomb ships, but with the silent fleets, it's different. Less sterile, more haunted, more personal. Some testimonies describe ships that look like inverted Imperial designs, mirror images of Gloriana-class battleships or Arch Mechanicus hulks, but twisted, smoothed, or stretched like they'd been pulled through some kind of spatial sieve. Others are described as having no visible propulsion systems, no weapons, no bridge, just long, floating monoliths etched with shifting, indecipherable runes. One popular theory is that the ships are alive, maybe not in a biological sense, but in the way a thinking machine might dream. That would explain the erratic sensor feedback, the failure of targeting systems to lock on them, the unexplainable sense of dread reported by those who've seen them through macro binoculars. A particularly chilling story I came across was from a civilian deep space hauler that claimed to have drifted within visual range of one of the ships for several hours. The crew said it didn't move, didn't respond. But they all described the same thing, a low vibration in their bones, like being inside a cathedral during an earthquake that never quite arrives. One of them painted a sketch of the ship after the encounter. It was crude, but you could tell it haunted him. The angles didn't make sense. The structure looked like it was turning inward on itself. And the colors? He used none, just pencil and black ink. When asked why, he said, because it was the opposite of color. I think what disturbs me most is the idea that these ships want to be seen. Not to intimidate, not even to warn, just to be remembered. Like they know they've been forgotten and are lingering just long enough to press themselves into someone's mind, to etch their outlines onto the subconscious of anyone who glimpses them. It's not surveillance. It's something stranger, a kind of cosmic insistence, a presence that refuses to disappear. The Imperium is filled with nightmares, chaos, xenos, rebellion, but those all make sense in their own horrific way. These ships don't. They don't belong. And yet they're always there, in the skies above Sol, gliding through the void with no flags, no names, and no purpose we're allowed to understand. That's what makes them scarier than any daemon or tyrannid hive. At least you know what those things want. The silent fleets? They just are. When you start digging into the origins of the silent fleets, the trail leads somewhere older than old. Older than the Imperium, older than the rise of the Emperor, maybe even older than the Age of Strife itself. And the deeper you go, the more it starts to feel like these ships don't belong in our galaxy anymore. If they ever did at all. One of the most widely discussed theories is that the fleets are remnants of the Dark Age of technology. It makes a disturbing kind of sense. That era was a time of expansion and invention beyond anything we can imagine today. Humanity spread across the stars like fire, guided by machine intelligences and armed with technologies that would make even the Mechanicus weep. Not everything built in that age was accounted for. Whole expeditionary fleets vanished into the void during the collapse, leaving behind nothing but legends and the occasional fragment of impossible hardware. So what if these silent fleets are just that? Ancient expeditions that outlived their purpose, forgotten by time, left to orbit the Sol system like ghosts who never got the message that the war was over. Some fans take this idea even further. They believe the fleets were never meant to come back. That they were constructed by rogue AIs or men of iron as autonomous scouts, maybe even colonization units, designed to operate without oversight, without end. If they were cut off during the collapse of the interstellar network, maybe they developed on their own, evolved, rewrote themselves. A fleet doesn't need much to survive if it has access to matter conversion tech and self-repair protocols. Give it 10,000 years, and it might not even resemble the thing it once was. Add to that a few more millennia, and maybe it stops caring about its original purpose entirely. Then there's the idea that these ships aren't just old, they're displaced, that they don't belong in our timeline at all, that they slipped through some tier in reality, arriving in orbit above Sol, from a version of the galaxy that no longer exists. Maybe they're from a reality where the Emperor never rose, where Terra fell, where mankind didn't become the Imperium, but something else entirely. That theory might sound far-fetched, but when you look at how many warp anomalies cluster around Terra, how many things the Administratum writes off as data inconsistencies or astropathic interference, you start to wonder. Maybe those inconsistencies are just signs of something trying to sync with a reality that moved on without it. One of the more tragic ideas I've come across is that the fleets were once humanity's protectors, built to defend Terra in the darkest age imaginable, stationed in orbit with the directive to awaken when certain conditions were met, and then forgotten. A line of code misplaced, a switch never flipped, or maybe they did awaken, and what they found was a galaxy so corrupted, so distant from their maker's vision, that they chose silence instead. Chose to watch and wait, unsure if the Terra they see is still the one they were meant to defend. Some fans think they're not even ships at all, that what we're seeing are the petrified remnants of something much bigger. Constructs meant to house minds or machines the size of continents, suspended in stasis or locked in loops. There's a chilling story I remember reading on one of the deep threads. A data savant on Luna allegedly tapped into an ancient satellite network and picked up whispers, literal whispers, coming from one of the objects in orbit. Not in any known language, not even in binary, just a pattern, like breathing, like something old trying to remember how to speak. The savant reportedly tore out his own augmetics after the download. No official incident was logged, but several moons later, that entire subnetwork was permanently deactivated. If they are from another time or place, maybe they're trapped here. Maybe they can't leave. That would explain their aimless orbits, their refusal to interact, their strange resonance with ships that get too close. You can feel that weight in the way people talk about them, not like they're threats, but like they're relics. Pieces of a puzzle we're not allowed to solve. Things that once had meaning, now reduced to symbols of something lost, like cathedral bells that still ring long after the congregation has fled and the gods have gone silent. To me, the scariest possibility is that these fleets represent a version of humanity we were never supposed to become. That in some timeline, some version of history, we built these things, and we became the Watchers. And something went so wrong that we buried them under layers of silence, hoping they'd never wake up again. Maybe they're not here for us. Maybe they're here for themselves, trying to remember what they were before they became shadows above the cradle of mankind. What really gets under your skin with the silent fleets is that they don't do anything. They don't fire. They don't hail. They don't dock, launch, land, or even drift off course. They just hover. They hold position or follow paths that loop and repeat with eerie precision, as if they're stuck in some ritual or protocol we can't understand. But the most unnerving part? They never leave. You can chase off a tyrannid tendril, you can repulse a chaos incursion, but the silent fleets are always there, like a shadow you forgot you had. Over the years, some pattern watchers, those fringe archivists and void theorists who spend their lives analyzing orbital anomalies, have noticed that the ships favor certain trajectories. Often it's a long elliptical path, not too close to Terra, but always within the outer solar orbit. Occasionally they'll reposition, never abruptly, but gradually, like planets shifting over millennia. Some move so slowly you'd never notice without precise tracking software. Others have been seen appearing where no previous sensor recorded them, as if they phased in from a place that isn't quite space in the way we understand it. There are records, unofficial of course, of ships passing through those zones and reporting malfunctioning systems. Auspex interference, Vox silence, a slight drop in temperature or a persistent hum through the hull like the groaning of old metal under pressure. Some captains swear they saw shapes beyond the void glass, ships just sitting there, miles wide, unmoving. But when they adjusted trajectory to confirm, there was nothing. Or worse, there was something, but it was gone the moment they tried to log it. It's like these fleets exist half a second out of sync with our time, always ahead or behind, just enough to never be where you're looking. Some fans interpret this behavior as passive surveillance, a kind of long-form observation that doesn't need contact or confrontation. It's the way an ancient predator might watch prey not for a kill, but out of curiosity. Or maybe boredom. That's the unsettling part. They don't act like enemies. They act like archivists. Cataloging, studying, waiting. And in a galaxy as violent and chaotic as this one, that kind of cold detachment is its own kind of horror. Then there's the repeated presence near Sol's Lagrange points. That's one of those details that gets ignored in mainstream lore, but deep fan theorists talk about it all the time. Lagrange points are areas of gravitational stability, perfect spots for stations or hiding. At least 3 different sightings over the last few centuries place these fleets near Lagrange points between Terra and Mars, or Terra and Luna. They never interact with orbital traffic. They just stay there, immobile for years at a time, then vanish. Some believe it's ritualistic. Others say it's mathematical, like they're taking measurements or aligning with something only they can detect. I've read logs from a retired Navy augur officer who served near Mars. He claimed that every standard decade, his long-range scans would pick up a sequence of null returns in deep orbit. The same coordinates, every time. He reported them, of course, but the reports were always dismissed as sensor ghosts. Eventually, he stopped trying. And that's the part that really gets me. People stop trying. When something refuses to react for long enough, it becomes background noise. We normalize the impossible just to avoid losing our minds. There's even a theory going around that these ships might be reacting to psychic currents, that their trajectories mirror the ebb and flow of the Astronomicon, or maybe the presence of psychers on Terra. That would explain why they never leave the solar system, because Terra isn't just the seat of power, it's the psychic center of the Imperium. If you wanted to observe the warp tides of humanity's soul, There's no better vantage point. And the idea that they're measuring us, that they're watching our dreams and screams and hopes through the psychic ether, that gets under your skin in ways no bolter ever could. The last piece that keeps me up at night is the lack of escalation. Most unknowns in the Imperium end with violence. Chaos, xenos, heresy. They attack, we respond. But these fleets never escalate. They've been there for millennia and have never fired a shot. That tells me one of two things. Either they're not interested in war, or they already won. And they're just waiting for us to figure that out. There's a kind of power in silence. Not passive, not weak. Absolute. A fleet that doesn't need to act, because its presence alone changes everything. That's what the silent fleets are. Not enemies, not allies, just watchers. And in a universe built on endless screaming, sometimes it's the quiet ones that make the most noise. There are stories, scattered, inconsistent, often whispered over static choked vox or passed down from voidfarer to voidfarer, that speak of people who got too close to the silent fleets and actually made it back. Survivors, witnesses. But the catch is, none of them ever really came back the same. They return with holes in their memory, with voices that no longer match their vocal cords, with the kind of 1,000-yard stare you usually only see in veterans of demon worlds. If they talk at all, they talk in fragments, repetitions, numbers, or worse, absolute silence. One of the most infamous tales is that of the St. Gillian's Vale, a Chartist-class freighter that veered off course near the edge of Pluto's orbit during a solar flare event. According to fragmented reports pulled from black market Vox archives, the ship's systems went dark for almost 27 minutes. Long enough to trigger an emergency distress beacon, but not long enough for a proper rescue response. When the systems came back online, the ship continued on its route and arrived at its intended port days later. But the crew was wrong. Not dead, not missing, just wrong. Their genetic profiles had drifted by fractions, just enough for the Medicae text to flag the anomaly. Their speech patterns had changed. Some had developed nervous tics, others refused to look at the stars ever again. One tried to carve an orbit map into his own chest using a utensil from the mess. The Administratum declared the incident a minor warp echo, common enough near the solar fringe, but people who've read the recovered logs say otherwise. One crew member, a junior Auspex officer, managed to record a voice entry during the blackout. He whispers about shapes outside the hull. He says they weren't ships exactly. They were waiting things, things that knew our names before we said them. That voice recording has been scrubbed from every data vault where it was uploaded. But it's been copied, shared, analyzed by void cults and tech heretics. And everyone agrees, the last 4 seconds of that file aren't human speech at all. There's something else, something that hurts when you hear it. There's also the case of the Gutter Hymn, a rogue trader vessel that supposedly salvaged a fragment of a silent fleet's hull, something torn loose during a micrometeorite storm. The fragment was cold to the touch, even in a pressurized environment. No markings, no radiation, but when they brought it aboard, the ship's machine spirit began to fail. Lights dimmed without reason. Systems reversed their own calibration. The crew began having identical dreams, visions of a sun that wasn't Sol, ringed by thrones made of dust. Eventually, the Gutter Hymn limped into port with a skeleton crew and a locked cargo bay. No one ever opened it. The ship was decommissioned and sent into the void near Uranus, supposedly to await further analysis. It hasn't moved since. Some fan circles talk about a phenomenon they call the quiet touch. It's not an attack, not even interference. It's something more abstract, an imprint left behind after contact with these ships. People exposed to the fleets don't always go mad. Sometimes they just change. They stop talking, or they start talking too much about things they couldn't possibly know. Warp coordinates that lead to nowhere. Names of stars that were never named. One of the more unsettling rumors is that some of them begin to sing low, rhythmic chants that resemble void ship hymns, but in a language no Lex Mechanic can identify. It doesn't hurt you, it just stays in your mind, like a melody with no beginning. Another crew, this one from a small Imperial Navy scout vessel, claimed to have visually confirmed one of the silent ships while on a patrol route. They closed within scanning range, and then nothing. For 4 days, their data was blank. The ship itself never stopped moving, but the logs recorded no input, no power fluctuations, no human activity. Then, without explanation, everything resumed. The crew had no memory of the gap, just 4 lost days and a strange patch of black where their Auspex records should have been. One officer later took his own life. Another disappeared from a Medicaid ward during evaluation. The official report, again, cited warp turbulence. But these aren't isolated cases. They form a pattern, scattered but insistent. Ships that return with rewritten logs, crews who won't speak of what they saw, wreckage with properties that defy physics, and always, that sense that something is watching. That whatever these fleets are, they don't need to attack to alter us. They only need to exist, to brush against us in the dark. That's the real horror, not destruction, not conquest. But the idea that proximity alone is enough to change you, that knowing they're there, that seeing even the edge of them, is enough to unravel something inside you that you didn't even know was fragile. I don't know if they're ghosts, machines, gods, or worse. But whatever they are, they leave behind pieces of themselves. In memory, in code, in the silence between signals. And no one who touches that silence ever walks away whole. If there's any faction in the Imperium that might know the true nature of the silent fleets and simply refuse to say a word, it's the Adeptus Mechanicus. And not the cog-polished Forge World bureaucrats we usually picture churning out lasguns and engine parts. I'm talking about the deep cults. The hidden sects buried in the catacombs of Mars. The Logimech. The Cognite Ascendant, the red-robed priests who speak to machines that haven't made a sound in 10,000 years and listen for responses in the radiation static between stars. Plenty of us in the lore community believe the Mechanicus knows a lot more than they let on. You don't build sensor arrays the size of mountain ranges and plug them into god engines buried under Martian soil just to chart asteroid paths. Mars watches. Constantly. And some of its ancient vaults hold technologies that predate the Imperium, even the Unification Wars. There are machines on Mars that see further than any augur. Machines that don't just map the galaxy, they remember it. One theory I keep coming back to is the one about the vision engines. Supposedly buried deep in the Noctis labyrinth beneath Olympus Mons, these ancient devices are said to have been constructed during the Dark Age by post-singularity minds, thinking machines who reached the edge of time itself. They didn't predict the future, not in the way an astropath might glimpse a flicker of fate. They calculated it. Entire possible futures, trillions of them, generated and archived in crystal matrices the size of hive towers. And in many of those futures, according to the theory, the silent fleets were there. Always above Sol, always watching. Like fixed points in a sea of probability, anchors that couldn't be moved, no matter how the future twisted around them. If that's true, then the Mechanicus doesn't just know about the fleets, they've been accounting for them for millennia, planning around them, or maybe serving them. It's a dark idea, but not unthinkable. The cult Mechanicus believes knowledge is sacred and secrecy is a form of worship. If the fleets hold the keys to some forbidden truth, then hiding that truth might be the greatest act of faith a tech priest could offer. And if those fleets were born from human hands before the rise of the Omnissiah, if they contain archaeotech so powerful it could rewrite the dogma of the machine god, then burying that knowledge becomes not just important, but holy. There are accounts, uncertain but chilling, that certain high-ranking magi are forbidden from gazing directly at Sol through the inner fortress observatoria. Not for safety reasons, but because of what they might see. The records suggest that several tech priests have suffered mental breakdowns after performing solar watch meditations, not from the sun itself, but from something around it, something their minds weren't conditioned to accept. The Mechanicus wrote these events off as logic hemorrhage or cognitive echo failure. But fans of deeper lore think it's something much simpler. These priests saw the fleets, and what they saw broke them. Then there's the idea of the Red Echo. Supposedly, a transmission, short, fragmented, and ancient, originates from within the Martian data vaults every few hundred years. It's not broadcasted, it's received, picked up by deep forge receivers. It doesn't contain words or numbers, just pulse intervals and synthetic tones. But the signature matches nothing in Mechanicus history. Some tech adepts believe it's a signal from the silent fleets, meant for Mars and Mars alone. A reminder, a command. Or maybe just a countdown. I've heard stories of certain forge shrines that conduct rituals involving no sound, absolute silence. Not just verbal silence, but sensory deprivation. Tech priests placed in null rooms for days, meditating on the concept of voidship form, without design. When they emerge, they often etch unfamiliar geometries into scrap metal with their mechadendrites. Shapes that match the few surviving descriptions of the fleet's hulls. Shapes no one in the Imperium should be able to know. There's a chilling thought that maybe the fleets weren't lost or abandoned. Maybe they were placed, positioned above Sol, not by accident or forgetfulness, but deliberately. By someone, or something, that knew what was coming. Maybe the Mechanicus was always part of that plan. Maybe their silence isn't fear. It's obedience. We like to think of Mars as a forge world, a factory, but deep down, it's a tomb. A place of memory, buried so deep that even the Martians have forgotten what's under their feet. The silent fleets feel like part of that same lineage, artifacts from a time when knowledge was power, and power was meant to last forever. Whatever link exists between them and the ocular engines beneath the Martian crust, it isn't just historical, it's spiritual, and maybe even inevitable. I don't know if the Mechanicus serves the fleets, fears them, or is simply trying to keep the rest of us from seeing what they already know. But I do know this. When the priests of Mars go silent, it's never for no reason. And this time, it feels like the silence is watching us back. For all the secrecy, all the redactions, all the burned records and sealed archives, a few pieces still manage to slip through the cracks. They're scattered, fragile things, fragments of reports, corrupted audio logs, offhand remarks, and otherwise routine communiques. But for fans who've been digging for years, these fragments are gold. They're what we call the surface evidence. Not proof, but presence. And once you start connecting them, the outline of something vast begins to form. Take the Navis Imperialis flight paths. Most people don't realize how heavily censored those star charts are. The officially distributed ones, especially those close to Sol, are scrubbed clean of anything that might look strange. But every so often, someone finds an old printout, a faded vellum map in a rogue trader's archive, or an obsolete cogitator cache from a forgotten outpost. And on those maps, faint notations, scribbles in the margins, non-standard drift mass cited, echo without return, possible debris field, no confirmation. These notes are always followed by a code, SCNC, silence confirmed, no contact. It's a little code that means we saw something, we ignored it. Then there are the officer logs, the ones never meant for publication, personal journals, memory records that somehow slipped the net. One of the most well-known among lore trackers is the journal of Fleet Lieutenant Saron Vex, who served aboard the Unbroken Faith in a defensive sweep of the outer solar orbit. His entries are mostly mundane, duty rotations, status checks, minor technical malfunctions, but one log stands out. He describes a line of lights in the dark, equidistant and motionless, like a string of stars laid by hand. No auspex contact, no engine wash, just the lights. He wrote, "We watched for 3 hours. No one moved, no one spoke. When they blinked out, it felt like waking up from a dream I didn't know I was having." The next day, he transferred off the ship and filed for reassignment to an atmospheric post. He never flew void again. Some of the most disturbing leaks come from astropaths, and not their words, exactly, because most of them can't describe what they experience, but the records left behind. Burned parchment sheets with scribbled symbols, sometimes drawn in their own blood. Crude pictographs of spirals, of orbits, that close in on themselves, of ships drawn like eyes staring outward. These are usually dismissed as the ravings of warp-sick minds. But when enough of them repeat the same images, when the spirals match real star trajectories, when the symbols correspond to known Lagrange points, you have to start asking whether madness is just another form of reception. What's strangest to me, though, is that these fragments haven't all been destroyed. Some of them linger. On purpose? It's hard to say. But you'd think that if the Inquisition or the Mechanicus truly wanted to erase the idea of the silent fleets, they'd sweep clean every last trace. Instead, it's like they let a few pieces remain. A single paragraph here, a footnote in a threat assessment, a grainy image in a declassified training file. Maybe it's incompetence, or maybe it's something else. There's a theory among the more paranoid fan circles that the Imperium wants us to remember. Just enough. Not understand, not investigate, but remember. That keeping the silent fleets on the edge of collective knowledge serves a purpose. Fear, perhaps. Obedience. After all, nothing motivates like the unknown. What better way to control a population than to whisper of watchers in the dark, impossible ships that make no demands and cast no shadows, only their presence? Others believe it's a trap, that the records we do have are bait, a way to identify those who seek forbidden knowledge. You dig too deep, you make too many connections, and suddenly your access gets revoked. Or worse, you disappear into a black archive beneath Terra, or you get reassigned to an expedition with no return history. It's happened. Not often, but enough times that fan archivists tend to work anonymously, using dead data channels and encoded aliases. Not out of arrogance, out of survival instinct. Still, we do the work. We find the scraps, we catalog the footnotes and chase the rumors. We build timelines of sightings, line up officer reports with astropathic tremors, compare drift patterns with ancient myths. Some of it's fantasy, some of it's desperate hope for meaning in a galaxy that offers so little. But some of it is truth. Not because it's confirmed, but because it persists. The Imperium doesn't leave things lying around by accident. And the fact that so many pieces of the silent fleets are still here, scattered, broken, but unburnt, that tells me they're not forgotten. They're waiting. And maybe the knowledge isn't just a danger. Maybe it's a key, a warning, a map, or the last thread connecting us to a truth we're not ready to see. Not yet, but someday. When we finally look up and ask the question out loud, who is watching the throne of Terra? What fascinates me most about the silent fleets isn't just their presence. It's the absence of response. In a galaxy where the Imperium will declare exterminate us for less than a suspicious warp reading, how is it that these fleets have hovered above Sol for millennia without a single recorded military action against them? The answer, I think, lies in the fractured and paranoid nature of the Imperium itself. Every institution sees what it wants to see. Or worse, what it's allowed to see. Let's start with the Adeptus Astartes. Space Marines are built to fight monsters, not decode enigmas. Their world is one of objectives, heresy, and cleansing fire. And yet some chapters, especially those stationed near Terra or tied to ancient traditions, have long maintained records that hint at the Watchers. The Grey Knights, in particular, are often cited in fan circles. Not because they've acted against the fleets, but because they haven't. There's a persistent rumor that the chapter has a silent directive, an internal decree never spoken aloud, that if these fleets are ever to move, they are to be left untouched. Observed, studied, but never engaged. For a force designed to destroy the worst nightmares in the galaxy, that kind of hesitation says a lot. Then there are the navigator houses. If anyone understands that space holds more than just stars, it's them. Navigators feel the warp, and they're trained from birth to recognize patterns, presences, and psychic echoes. Some believe the older houses like Belisarius or Nostromo have their own private vaults of knowledge regarding the silent fleets. Ancestral recordings of gravimetric disturbances. Genetic memory whispers passed down through navigator lines. One tale tells of a navigator who, during a routine transition through the Sol system, refused to open his third eye for 3 entire weeks. He claimed that if he did, the ships above would see through him. When he finally did open it, he never spoke again. Officially, his mind broke. But some believe he saw something that reached back. The Ordo Malleus, the demon hunters, has always operated at the edges of understanding. They deal in threats that bend reality and sanity, so it's no surprise many fans suspect they're aware of the fleets. But what's curious is how little they've said or done. There's a theory that the Ordo Malleus considers the fleets non-manifesting anomalies, which essentially means we see them, but they haven't done anything wrong yet. The real conspiracy kicks in with the idea that the Ordo has already attempted contact. Not through diplomacy, of course, through containment. Some believe the fleets are the result of failed Malleus experiments with time-locked sanctums or weaponized psi-engines. Not enemies, not aliens. Just echoes of a project gone too far. And if that's true, their silence isn't mystery. It's guilt. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, meanwhile, is another story altogether. there's no doubt they've felt the presence of the fleets. Astropaths are like antennae for psychic pressure, and it's hard to imagine a cluster of megastructures hanging over Terra not generating something. But the choirs don't sing about it. Not officially. There have been reports, unconfirmed of course, of whole choirs entering fugue states after long-range psychic sessions near the fleets, expected orbital paths. Some sketch spirals. Others mutter in broken high Gothic about silent sermons or the hymn without voice. Many of these astropaths are quietly retired or reassigned to deep core relay posts where no one can hear them scream. The Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle, rarely speak of the fleets, but there's a particular order, the Order of the Shrouded Flame, whose doctrine emphasizes vigilance against unspoken heresy. Their fortress convent in Luna's shadow is rumored to be built atop a vault of relics recovered from void vessels that encountered the fleets. Whether it's true or not, the idea resonates, that a militant order would exist to stand not against heresy shouted from pulpits, but against truths that have never been spoken. It's poetic. Terrifying, but poetic. And here's where things get strange. With all these factions possibly aware, with all these isolated reactions and hidden files, the question becomes, why hasn't anyone done anything? Why haven't the High Lords issued a decree? Why hasn't the Inquisition launched a purge, or the Navy sent a battle group to investigate? The simplest theory is fear. Not fear of the fleets themselves, but fear of what action would reveal. That once you open the box, once you challenge the silence, you can't undo what you learn. Some fans believe the fleets are a test, a trap, or worse, a mirror. That to acknowledge them is to confront something the Imperium itself has long buried, its limits. And yet, in every institution, in every order, there are outliers, rogue inquisitors who've gone missing in the void, librarians compiling forbidden stellar cartography, navigators who stare too long into the black and never come back. They're the ones keeping the flame alive, even if they don't know it. The ones who poke at the edges of what's safe, asking questions no one dares answer. In the end, maybe the most chilling thing isn't that no one's talking. It's that everyone might be talking, just not with each other. Every branch of the Imperium clutching their own piece of the puzzle, convinced it's too dangerous to share. So the silence endures, not just above Saul, but within the Imperium. Each order watching, recording, waiting. And above them all the fleets remain, still, mute, unshaken. Whatever they are, they've already done what no Xenos Empire or traitor Primarch could. They've made the Imperium hesitate. Sometimes I wonder what it would feel like, the moment the silence breaks. Not with a bang, not with an invasion, not with fire or fury, but with something smaller, quieter. A signal, a ripple across the ether, a new star blinking into existence on every void ship's auger screen. One moment, the fleets are mute. The next, they speak. And the galaxy is never the same again. But what would they say? That's the terrifying part. Maybe they wouldn't say anything at all. Maybe it wouldn't be language. Maybe it wouldn't even be sound. Some fans believe the first contact will come in the form of dreams. Not warp dreams, not the madness of chaos, but something colder, more precise. A memory implanted into a million minds at once. Shared visions of impossible machines, cities built into the crust of dead suns, tombs that breathe. And maybe, just maybe, a glimpse of Terra, not as it is but as it once was, or as it will be. The idea that they might communicate not with words but with images. It's beautiful, in a horrifying way. Imagine a sister of battle collapsing in the middle of prayer, her eyes bleeding starlight as she sees a billion futures die. Or a navigator sobbing silently, not from pain, but from understanding, finally knowing what's been watching them from the edge of their sight. Not malevolent, not benevolent, just inevitable. Some theories go further. They say the moment the fleets break their silence, reality itself could shift. That their speech won't be heard, it will be felt. A sudden alignment of planetary orbits, a rearrangement of the warp tides, perhaps even a universal pause, as if the galaxy itself is holding its breath. I read one fan post that claimed the fleets have already spoken, but our minds couldn't process it. That what we call cognitive ghosting, or machine spirit interference, is just the echo of a voice we were never meant to hear. And if they do speak, what then? What if they ask something? Or worse, what if they tell us something? That we were never alone, That humanity was always an experiment, that the Emperor isn't who we think he is. What if they show us the truth, not a truth we can understand, but one that fractures the core of the Imperium's belief? What happens when the Ecclesiarchy sees a vision that contradicts the Lectitio Divinitatis? What happens when the Mechanicus is shown a machine god that isn't the Omnissiah? What happens when Terra itself realizes it's not the throne, it's the stage? There's a haunting theory among void priests that the silence is the message, that these fleets have said everything they needed to just by staying silent, that their very presence above Sol is a kind of judgment, not passive, not aggressive, just a measure, a scale hanging in the dark, and that the moment they speak, it means the measure is full, that the silence was never meant to last, and what follows isn't a war, but a conclusion. Others believe the fleets can't speak, because what they carry isn't meant for us yet, that they're waiting for a trigger, a signal not from Terra, but from beyond the galaxy, or from the warp itself, and once they receive it, they'll act. Not with violence, but with truth. The kind that burns. And here's a thought that's lingered with me for a while. What if it's not the fleets that need to speak? What if it's us? What if they're waiting for our signal? A phrase, a pattern, a frequency buried in one of the oldest hymns of Mars, or a forgotten rune on the surface of Luna. Maybe all this time, the silence has been a test, a question. And every time we turn away, every time we redact a document or erase a report or silence a witness, we fail it. There's something sacred about their silence. It feels ancient, almost divine, like a cathedral that's never held a sermon. And the fear isn't that they might scream, it's that one day, they might answer. Because to answer implies we asked something. And what if the question was wrong? It's ironic, really. We live in a galaxy where gods walk, where daemons howl, where reality melts under the pressure of belief. And yet, it's the quiet that haunts us, the stillness. The watchers above Sol who have never lifted a weapon, never made a demand, just waited, watched, remembered, and maybe judged. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If they spoke, if they reached out tomorrow, not with fire but with understanding, would we even listen, or would we silence them, just like we silence every truth we fear? And if you've made it this far, if you've stared into the void with me and felt something stare back, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think the fleets would say? Or do you believe they've already spoken, and we're just not ready to understand? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe if you want to keep unraveling the hidden layers of the Imperium. And remember, some stories don't end with a bang. Some end with a whisper that was always there, waiting for someone to finally hear it. There's something hauntingly beautiful about the silent fleets. We don't know what they are. We've never heard their voices, never seen their weapons fired, never watched them take action. And yet, their presence lingers like the echo of a forgotten truth, a cold whisper hanging in the void just above the cradle of humanity. They don't conquer, they don't preach, they don't even blink, they just watch. And that, more than anything else in this universe of blood and fire, might be the most terrifying thing of all. In a galaxy where violence is constant and declarations of power are screamed through macro cannons and bolter fire, the idea that something could exist silently, endlessly, without ever needing to justify itself, that breaks the rhythm. That breaks us. We look to the stars and expect threats we can categorize: orcs, tyrannids, daemons, enemies with names, motivations, patterns. But the silent fleets deny us that comfort. They aren't chaos, they aren't order. They just are. They stand in defiance of everything we've been taught to expect from the void. And the fact that they orbit our system, not Cadia, not some backwater forge world, but Sol itself, that says something. Maybe that's why this story has stayed with me for so long. Because for once, the horror isn't about war. It's about scale, perspective. The realization that for all our legions, our titans, our supposed dominion over the stars, there's still something we don't understand. Something right above us. And we don't even have a name for it. I think in a strange way, the fleets reflect the Imperium itself. Massive, ancient, unknowable, full of ghosts and secrets. We like to believe we've built an empire that spans the galaxy, that the God Emperor rules from his golden throne with divine clarity. But what if all of this, Terra, Mars, the whole Sol system, is just a stage, and above it, in the dark, sit the real audience, the watchers, the ones who've seen everything, and said nothing. And what does that say about us? That we build and burn and scream and bleed, always assuming someone's listening, someone cares. The fleets remind us that maybe no one does, or worse, maybe someone does and chooses to remain silent. That's the real wound they leave. Not fear, not mystery, insignificance. But still, we look, we wonder, we piece together old charts and corrupted logs and fading whispers, hoping to understand something that may never speak to us. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. Not the conquest, not the faith, the curiosity, that stubborn need to reach out into the dark and ask, what's out there? Even when the answer might be watching already. If you've followed this journey with me, thank you. I know it's been a dive into the eerie, the speculative, and the downright strange. But that's what makes Warhammer beautiful. It's not just bolters and skulls, it's mystery. It's the lingering question in the back of your mind after the last page of a codex is read. And if you've got your own theory about the silent fleets, I want to hear it. Do you think they're human? Alien? Forgotten weapons? Or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the speculation alive. And if this journey through shadows above Sol resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, share this with someone who also stares too long at star charts, and let's keep searching together. Because the truth is still up there, silent, waiting, watching.